What's up, everybody? Welcome in. Happy Saturday. This is the Pack a Day podcast on YouTube. My name is Andy Herman. I am a writer and editor for Packer Report, as well as the owner and founder of the Pack a Day podcast. Appreciate you joining me on this Saturday. Hopefully you are doing well, and hopefully your weekend is off to a great start. I'm going to continue talking about the NFL draft today, and let me start by asking you, in the last 25 years, the Packers have doubled up with their first two picks in the draft at the same position on 5 different occasions. One very recently. You can probably think of a few of them. Can you think of all 5 times that the Packers have doubled up in the last 25 years? Feel free to pause it and come back if you want. But they've done it 5 times, 4 of them at the same exact position, which is really, really crazy. And if you think about it, in basically the last 25 years, it's actually a little bit less than that, but basically once every 5 years, they double up with their first 2 picks at the exact same position. So the most recent, of course, as you very much well remember, was Jaire Alexander and Josh Jackson at cornerback. Prior to that, same position, Demarius Randall and Quentin Rollins at cornerback. Prior to that, same position, Ahmad Carroll and Joey Thomas. And before that, same position, you guessed it, Antoine Edwards and Fred Vinson. Remember, they went back to back to back in that draft. Antoine Edwards, Fred Vinson, and Mike McKenzie in that draft. Of course, McKenzie ended up being the best of the 3 because go figure. And then the previous one before that was defensive line with Vonnie Holliday and Jonathan Brown. So Green Bay, and again, in the last 25 years, has gone back to back with the same position with their first 2 picks on 5 different occasions. So my question today is, what position would Green Bay be most likely to double up on with their first couple picks, or maybe even it's like a first and a third rounder, right? What would be most likely, and what position would be most beneficial, both in the short term and in the long term, for that type of investment in a specific position? So let's kick things off with the cornerback position. And why the hell not, right? We've literally seen it 4 times in the last 20 years where they've gone back-to-back cornerbacks with their first 2 picks, and not far off with Kevin King, Josh Jones, both playing defensive back as well. So the 2 defensive back situation has certainly happened on more than one occasion. So let history repeat itself maybe one more time. I guess maybe they should stick away from it because of all those picks. Literally Jaire Alexander is the only one that's worked out. Antoine Edwards was okay for a while. Fred Vinson, the only thing that Fred Vinson turned out for was trading him for Amon Green. So I guess in a roundabout way, that pick turned out very well. Ahmad Carroll and Joey Thomas did not turn out. Randall and Rollins certainly did not turn out. And Josh Jackson to this point has not turned out. So maybe stick away with away from the back-to-back corners. But let's say they do go in that direction in this draft. I think around pick 29, you're probably looking at maybe somebody like a Fetu Melifonwu from Syracuse. Maybe, I doubt it, but maybe a Greg Newsome falls. Maybe they pick up Stokes from Georgia as well. I think any of those 3 could potentially be in play there. Then maybe they go in a couple different directions as well, right? Maybe they get Campbell from Georgia, or going with an Asante Samuel or something like that. But let's say they address that outside cornerback position first. Then in the second round, either maybe move up or stand pat, and maybe an Aaron Robinson from UCF falls, or an Elijah Molden, or maybe even crazy, they'd probably have to move up for this, but maybe they move up and get Asante Samuel and decide that they want to play him in the slot. That would give Green Bay, some real versatility and depth in their defensive backs. And obviously in that first round, somebody that can play on the outside in Melifonwu, Newsome, Stokes, maybe even in Asante Samuel or someone like that. And then in the second round, get somebody that can play on the inside and compete with Chandon Sullivan. And first of all, I think that is a benefit right this season. I know they brought back Kevin King. I know they brought back Chandon Sullivan. I know they've got Josh Jackson and Kadar Hallman. Let me just tell you right now, the only cornerback that they're making any draft decisions, or that is even in their purview when they're making these draft decisions, is Jaire Alexander. Kevin King's on a 1-year deal. Chandon Sullivan's on a 1-year deal. Josh Jackson has 1 year remaining, and you're certainly not making any draft decisions based on Josh Jackson. The same can be said for Kadar Hallman, KB Anento, Stanford Samuels, and any other cornerback on the roster. They're not making any draft decisions based on those players. They're just frankly not. So first of all, in the short term, to be able to have players that can come in and press Chandon Sullivan and Kevin King and make them play at their best to keep their spots. And if they don't, you have young talent to come in and play. I think that's certainly a benefit. And then long term, you go into next year. Right now, you're Jair Alexander and a bunch of question marks. So to be able to go in with a Jair Alexander, and let's just say it's Melifonwu and like an Aaron Robinson, I mean, you feel really good about that trio. And time will tell, right? And we've seen Green Bay go corner and it not work out in a variety of different ways. But at least as of now, you'd feel pretty darn good about that cornerback group moving forward with the youth, the depth, the versatility that some of those players have. So I think both in the short term and in the long term, a move like that could very much make some sense. They could flip it up as well. Maybe go with more of that slot receiver in the first round. Now, they would have to love an Aaron Robinson or an Elijah Molden. I think that's really steep at pick 29. I have seen some mocks with those two players going in the late first. I think that's very, very, very steep, but maybe they move back a little bit to the beginning of the second round, or maybe they just love those players, or maybe they take Samuel thinking he could play either on the inside or the outside, and then second round comes around, and Paulson Adebo, I think, is somebody that's going to be very much on the Packers' radar in the second round, and then they take him in the second. You have Adebo and King competing on the outside, Jair Alexander starting at 1, and then now you've got either Robinson, Molden, or Samuel battling it out for that slot position with Chandon Sullivan. So again, a lot of different ways that they could go with this. And I certainly think that it would behoove them, or it could behoove them to really, buoy that position, bring it back up and have some competition both for now. And then again, especially going into next year where you just don't have the depth at that position moving forward. All right, the more obvious one, I think, and let's just be real here, there's more of these players that you need is offensive line, so it's much more advantageous to build the depth at this position. And I very much get the idea that Green Bay's had a ton of success over the years building up this position with 4th and 5th and 6th round picks, whether it be a Scott Wells, a TJ Lang, Chad Clifton was a 2nd rounder, Mark Tauscher was a 7th. The list of names at this point. So they've definitely had a variety of success building up the roster with these later round picks. So I definitely think that that's something that they could continue to do. I don't think it's why I've seen a lot of people also mention, well, they just drafted 3 guys last year, and John Runyon Jr. and Simon Stepaniak and Jake Hansen. Like they're going to be just fine. Like, listen, I liked what John Runyon Jr. did, and I think he's legitimately in line for a starting spot. And Simon Stepaniak could develop into a nice player, but Simon Stepaniak was hurt all of last season, and you have no idea what he brings to the table right now. And Jake Hansen nowhere near looked the part a season ago. And ultimately, these were 3 mid to late 6th round picks. The ROI on players like that are not great. So your hope when you do that is that you get one guy that turns out. And right now it seems like that's more likely to be a John Runyon Jr. And if you hit on 2 or amazingly enough 3, so be it. But you're not making draft decisions right here and now based on guys like Jake Hansen and Simon Stepaniak, or even probably John Runyon Jr. at this point. So you definitely can still address this. Now, let's say in the first round they go a Tevin Jenkins, a Liam Eichenberg, a Sam Cosmi, someone like that to potentially play that tackle position both now and into the future. And then in the second round they go interior. Maybe a Quinn Meinertz from Whitewater falls to them in the second round. Dylan Redund seems unlikely, but maybe they move up a little bit. Trey Smith, Wyatt Davis, more pure guards. Those are certainly a direction that you could go in this draft. Help out the interior of the offensive line, help out at tackle. You could potentially have a Jenkins or a Cosmi start at left tackle until Bakhtiari gets back, and then move to right tackle as their long-term position, move Billy Turner inside, have Redunds or Trey Smith or Wyatt Davis or Quinn Meinertz compete with Stepaniak and John Runyon Jr. and Lucas Patrick. And, you've got a lot of different versatile pieces there with a Billy Turner and with a Elton Jenkins and Lucas Patrick being able to play guard or center. And, even Cosmi can probably play tackle guard, right? Some of these guys, probably a Meinertz or a Redunds might be able to play literally all 5 spots. Or at least until you figure out what's his best spot. Meinertz can probably play guard or center. So you have a lot of versatility here if you would go in this direction. And to me, maybe the most important aspect of the Packers' run last season was the depth along their offensive line and building that back up and making sure that you're set there with some really talented pieces that can compete for a long time, especially when you've got 2 phenomenal offensive line coaches right now that can really help get these guys to a high level sooner rather than later. Really would not mind them going in that direction. They could also go interior early, right? Maybe they go with a Creed Humphrey or a Landon Dickerson in the first round. I think that's highly unlikely, but let's say they legitimately want to run back what they had a season ago. Well, the only player of real significance that they lost from a season ago was Corey Linsley. You draft a Creed Humphrey or Landon Dickerson and plug them in at center, you might be right back in the same spot, as soon as Bakhtiari gets back. And you literally are almost running it back entirely from a season ago. And then maybe a Sam Cosmi or a Dylan Redunz or a Brady Christensen or a Walker Little, fall to you in the second round. And now you've got somebody who maybe again can play there until David Bakhtiari gets back. Or again, is the long-term answer at right tackle once, either Billy Turner kicks inside if you have that luxury, or, next year if you release Billy Turner due to salary cap constraints. So there's a lot of options and versatility that going back-to-back with offensive line, would help with. I think it's much more likely that you address a couple different positions early and then maybe go offensive line like third, fifth, sixth or seventh, something like that. Maybe even third, one of your fourths, one of your fifths. I think you could do something like that and still have a lot of success and bring in guys to compete right away. So I don't think it's necessarily likely, but I think it's maybe the most likely of them all if they went back to back at the same position in any position. And then last but not least, defensive line. I think this is a little bit more unlikely simply because the depth of the defensive line just isn't there. But maybe they ultimately get two of the top three defensive linemen in this draft. Maybe they either take a Christian Barmore or a Levi Onwuzurike in the first round, and they feel really comfortable with that pick to pair with Kenny Clark. And then in the second round, maybe a Milton Williams or a Tommy Tagai or Davion Nixon are sitting there, and they feel really strongly about one of those players. I have been pounding the table for getting Kenny Clark help for longer than I can remember at this point, and I certainly think going back to back, if they felt strongly about these players, I think that'd be really rich. I don't think you ever want to be caught taking back-to-back players at what's considered one of the weakest positions in the draft. I think that's probably not the best use of resources, but if every other team is down on them and they still think that they're really good players, maybe you steal a guy or two in the first and second round. And maybe while everyone's looking at other positions, you ultimately end up with the two best defensive linemen in this draft, and that can help you moving forward. So I think it's unlikely at defensive line, but again, it's always super hard to predict these things. And as you're looking at it, either corner, offensive line, or defensive line makes the most sense. I certainly don't think you can go wide receiver back-to-back 1 and 2, and inside linebacker would be really tough when you've already got two young guys in Kamal Martin, and then just the overall youth that they have at that linebacker position. Even Ty Summers is still pretty young as well. Chris Barnes, obviously, the other name I was looking for there. So they've got some youth there. So I don't think you could go back-to-back at linebacker, but. To me, corner, offensive line, defensive line, if they did go back-to-back or even two in the first 3 rounds, those would be the positions that you'd ultimately be looking at, and those are some names that I think Green Bay could potentially be considering. If they triple up in this draft, remember, 3 of the last 4 they have tripled up. Running back, Aaron Jones, Devontae Mays, and Jamal Williams. Wide receiver, EQ, Jamon Moore, and MVS. And then offensive line last year with Hanson Stepaniak, as well as John Runyon Jr. So 3 of the last 4 years, they tripled up. If they triple up in this draft, I have to think that it's offensive line. Again, there's just more players there, although defensive line later in the draft could certainly be a possibility to bring in some competition as well. That does it for me today. Make sure to check out our brand new audio podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Subscribe if you haven't already. I would greatly appreciate it. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.